It's really interesting seeing people try to hype Larian Studios as the next big RPG thing, right? I'm getting a lot of flashbacks to like CD Projekt Red and how like it became a meme that like, oh, the Polish, they're better game developers than everyone else. Just completely forget Japan exists. But yeah, they're better than everyone else because they made one game, The Witcher 3, which by the way wasn't that great to begin with. But 2015 was a really obnoxious period where people were seriously trying to push this idea that CD Projekt Red were like these amazing developers, like these just god tier developers, like the best there's ever been, and the best there was in the industry right then, right? And it fell apart eventually with the release of Cyberpunk 2077, but I would argue it went on way too long, right? I would argue it's like one of the most embarrassing things about that generation, right? Where like everybody was like very desperately trying to pretend The Witcher 3 was a top tier video game, but in reality it really wasn't even worth talking about. It was just a lazy piece of garbage, right? It was just a complete mess from start to finish, and you don't really see a lot of people really acknowledge that, right? Like all anybody wants to do is like pretend it's the greatest thing ever, right? And that CD Projekt Red was like a top tier developer, right? We are seeing history repeat itself with Baldur's Gate 3 in Larian Studios, right? Larian has they went up on stage at like some event, I think it was another award show, and they were speaking out against the industry. They were speaking out about shareholders, and they were talking about how like, oh, the evil shareholders, they don't respect creativity in games. And this kind of goes into what I was talking about last week when I made statements about how it feels like Larian is really trying to present itself as like the good guy in the gaming industry, even though that like they did all the things that every other AAA developer does with like the broken releases and the bugs and like the unfinished product. Like Larian is not special, but right now they're desperately trying to prop themselves up as the good guys of the industry, right? And one of the things they did, one of the virtue signaling things they did, was speak out against a work culture from other studios. Speak out against what's been happening to other studios, like uh, speaking out against shareholders specifically, right? And the narrative is that like, oh, Larian is completely independent. They don't have shareholders. They're completely owned by Swin. Nah, nah, nah. Like they can do whatever they want. They're not beholden to anybody. That's not how that works. Okay? Like if they're going to make further D&D games, Baldur's Gate 3, they're going to have to get permission from Hasbro, right? They're going to have to get permission from like other license holders. Like they're always going to be beholden to someone if they're going to continue leeching off of other people's IPs, right? But that's not like the core issue here. The issue I have with this, and this has been happening for a while. This isn't anything new. Like people want to keep pretending that Larian is independent, right? They want to keep pretending that Larian isn't owned by anybody, that it's like a completely like developer owned thing. But no, like 30% of the company is owned by Tencent, right? And before anybody tells you that like, oh, Swin owns the other 70%, Tencent's just gonna swoop in after Swin retires and just seize it. No matter what happens, Larian's going under, right? Like there's nothing they can do. But yeah, like the cope right now is just pretending that like, oh, Larian, they're the best there is. Like they're so wholesome. They're what every developer should strive to be. But it's just a cope. It's not real, right? Like it's a lie. Like it's just blatantly trying to manipulate you into thinking the developer is like better than it actually is. And I would argue like everything about Baldur's Gate 3 has been about that, about trying to convince you that like this is some top tier product. This is some top tier studio that's going to be putting out like 10 out of 10 games forever, right? But in reality, they haven't put out shit, right? Like that seems to be the thing now. Is like Baldur's Gate 3 is games like it are going to try and like change the gamer landscape. They're going to try to change the culture instead of putting out something like Dragon Age Inquisition, which is only praised by game journalists. They're going to try and manipulate you, the fan, into thinking that like this studio is based, that this studio like has your best interest at heart, that this studio is like hardcore and is producing the best games in the market, right? Like that's what we've been seeing pretty consistently from Baldur's Gate 3 for the past couple of months. Is just posturing about what great developers they are, like all the things they intend to do, like dick sucking each other, like based on the success of Baldur's Gate 3, like the alleged success of Baldur's Gate 3, like trying to keep themselves relevant, but in reality, it's I'm starting to see more and more people like start to acknowledge the real problems with Baldur's Gate 3. For example, like what were we told initially after launch? There's never been a more stable game than this. It's crazy how bug free it is, despite how long it is. Like we were told over and over again, this is like one of the best like running games ever, right? We were told that it was completely glitch free. And that's not the case. Like that's obviously not the case because you can look at the patch notes. Like you can see how much they added and changed over the past couple of months. Like you can even see they like improve like the kissing animations. Like there was an article about that. Like they're still adding stuff to the game. Like it wasn't finished at any point, but you're still going to see people pretend it was, right? Because that was part of the cope. That was the reason this game was worshipped so much was to trick you into thinking this was some amazing game when in reality wasn't even really worth talking about. Like it's not even something that like I want to keep addressing in the future. Like it's one of those things where I'm just like, oh yeah, that came out. That's a thing that exists. Like I don't know. I completely forgot about it. Like forget about it every time that like articles aren't being shoved in my face about how great Larian is. Like it's a lot like Witcher 3 in that way. Like I'm playing so many other better games that like dealing with something like Larian doesn't even really cross my mind, right? Like every single time it's just like, oh yeah, I could talk about Larian. I could talk about Baldur's Gate 3, but I would rather just play a better game. And I think that's essentially what everyone's doing right now is just playing better games. To me, I don't think I don't think the narrative that like Baldur's Gate 3 is the best game ever made is gonna last. Right? Like I think it's gonna be a lot like No Man's Sky or The Last of Us Part Two, where like game journalists keep trying to push it, but like the harder they try, like more and more people are gonna realize something is up. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting from this now. Is that like the people who aren't into Baldur's Gate 3 are beginning to ask questions like, wait, is that true? Like, is Larian completely independent? And the answer is no, right? Like, we've been seeing the cracks start to show for a long time in regards to this property and this company. But yeah, this is going to be another CD Projekt Red, and I don't know why so many people are falling into this trap, other than like the obvious, like the refusal to admit that Nintendo is the studio that everyone should be emulating, right? That Nintendo should be the one that's propped up as the studio that's the one to imitate and like the best in the industry, right? Like we need to acknowledge Nintendo is like what people pretend that like Rockstar, or Larian, or Bethesda were at one point, right? Like, at what point are we going to start doing that? Like, it feels in a lot of ways that it's not going to happen until like all of these companies just shut down. Like, they just have to go. Like, otherwise, like we're gonna just be stuck doing this forever. And it's very frustrating to be sure, but I suppose this is like what every gamer has to go through is just listening to people blather on about like lesser quality games that nobody really cares about all that much, right? And again, before Baldur's Gate 3, it was like like Spider-Man 2. So it's like no, Spider-Man 2 came out later. Before it was like what Street Fighter 6. Like it's the same thing, right? So many people tried to say Street Fighter 6 was great. Was it? No, it wasn't. But people tried to pretend it was for the longest time. So, with that being said, I think what we can expect to see here is Larian will continue to be will continue to be pushed until people get tired of it and they have to move on to something else. Like I don't know how long it's going to take. Like I think it's not going to be as relevant as The Witcher 3. That's been one of my things with Baldur's Gate 3 for the longest time is that like it's obviously not as influential or popular as Dark Souls or Witcher, but you won't see like anybody admit it, right? Like that's the issue here is that like we're beginning to see like these big AAA games that like the industry wants to prop up to push their political nonsense. Like those games are not doing as well as they used to. And it's not just Baldur's Gate 3. If anything, Baldur's Gate 3 has done unusually well compared to like Spider-Man 2 and like the big propaganda products of the past couple of years. Like really, I think Baldur's Gate 3 is simply the beginning of the end.